Hi, I'm Darius Kazan and welcome to Vlogs of History After Hours. This is the show that's designed to add upon the normal shows, Vlogs of History, that come out every single Monday on this channel, where we take a look at a subject from every week's episode and dive a little more in depth. So this week we've taken a look at Napoleon, which is the screen behind me, and we've talked about Napoleon's war into Russia, right? That was towards the end of the Napoleonic Wars, and if you're unfamiliar, the Napoleonic Wars is a series of wars led by Napoleon, which were mainly a lot of victories, and it brought France a lot of good reputation and a lot of territories too. So in 1812, Napoleon decided to invade Russia. The point of this invasion was to essentially get Poland off the Russians' radar and not make them a threat anymore. Because France and Poland were allied, and Napoleon wanted to gain Poland's support even more, and so he decided to invade Russia and disrupt their trade routes, and so sort of like save Poland in a way. What Napoleon did not think about was that the Russians had a very unique strategy to fight Napoleon, which was very weird too, if you take a look at it this way. So as Napoleon was making his way into Russian territory, well, he was encountering some Russian armies, which he defeated, of course, because Napoleon was great at armies, and this was what he did at war and everything. He was a great general. And as he was encountering the Russians, well, they kept retreating even more and more into Russian territories. At first, Napoleon wasn't sure why, what was the purpose of this, because as the Russians were retreating further and further in their territory, well, France was taking over Russian territory. And why would the Russians allow France to take over their territory? This was very misunderstood by Napoleon and his armies. Even so, the Russians would burn their territories ahead of the French. So when the French would come, well, they would see that the territory that they were marching into would be already burnt, to which they thought, what is going on? Why are they doing this? But if you think about it from the Russians' perspective, well, France was very deep in Russian territory and they needed supplies. And when you have such big armies, it's a struggle to actually get the supplies that you need. And most of the time you use the land to actually grow things and make your own supplies, which the Russians burnt. And so the French, well, they had no way of getting supplies. Either way, Napoleon, it didn't really stop, and he kept going. He really kept going up until they reached Moscow. When they reached Moscow, Napoleon was hoping to see the emperor there and have diplomatic discussions and get Poland off the hook, so to speak, and also disrupt some trade routes with Britain so that it has an effect on Britain. To Napoleon's surprise, when he actually managed to get into Moscow, well, nobody was there. Everybody was evacuated. And the Russians also started to strategically burn parts outside of Moscow to again prevent the French from getting supplies. Add on to this the incoming Russian winter, which Napoleon and his armies were in no way prepared for. I mean, it's Russia. The winter there is very cold. And so you had Napoleon's armies who were demoralized. They were very cold. They did not have the right equipment to withstand this cold. The horses, them too, a lot of them died, and they were also getting burnt by the Russians, which affected their supplies. Because of that, well, Napoleon was forced to retreat. And out of the 600,000 men that came into Russia with Napoleon, only 100,000 came out. What was happening was that a lot of them died on their way to Moscow, but when they started retreating, well, that's when the Russians started to attack, because their armies were weak and they were on their way out. And that's when the Russians started to attack, and they even kidnapped a lot of the Russians' armies. They say that about 400,000 were killed and 100,000 were captured to then eventually be killed afterwards. Napoleon eventually returned to Paris, and this really affected his reputation in a negative way. Before that, Napoleon was the great Napoleon, the Emperor of France, and the great general who could lose no battle. But now he actually lost, and he lost to the Russians. This made Austria and Prussia, which were allies of France, turn against France and form a coalition, which we talked about in Vlogs of History, the normal show. And they started attacking France from everywhere. And France was losing territories, they were losing battles, all the way up until, well, they actually invaded France. The coalitions invaded France, kicked Napoleon out of power, and sent him into exile. His first exile. He then, of course, got another army, tried to come back, tried to overthrow the king, and he failed again, and he was sent in exile again, where he died. But we're not going to go into depth about that, because that has been covered in Vlogs of History. So there you have it. That was the Russian invasion of France. It is important because it was the turning point for the Napoleonic Wars and for Napoleon himself. Like I said, his reputation was great, phenomenal before, but after that it was the end of Napoleon, so to speak. And that was it for Vlogs of History After Hours episode 2. If you've enjoyed it, leave a like, share it to a friend, and subscribe to be notified when the next one comes out. Remember, these come out every single Wednesday, and I do have the main Vlogs of History episodes that come out every single Monday. That way you don't have that much time in between, so the knowledge is still fresh in your head. As always, I'm your host, Darius Cosson. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I will see you all in the next one.